The start of the 2024 college football season is less than a week away. So in this video, I wanted to talk about the biggest question for every single preseason top 25 team. And let's start off with number 25, Iowa. My question for them is, can the offense take a step forward? I think if Iowa wants to have a similar season to what they had in 2023, then the offense needs to take a step forward. They hired former Western Michigan head coach Tim Lester to be the offensive coordinator. Cade McNamara is back at quarterback, and they return one of their top offensive targets, Luke Lachey, at tight end. Cade McNamara was limited time during the spring because he was recovering from injury. And they don't have great options at wide receiver, and they did not use the portal to their advantage, so I don't have high expectations for the offense in 2024. Number 24 is NC State. And my question for them is, can Grayson McCall and the offense be good enough to get NC State to an ACC title appearance in 2024? Because I think this offense has great upside heading into next season. They added former Group of 5 quarterback Grayson McCall. He's one of the most experienced quarterbacks in the country. They have the young Kevin Concepcion back, who had over 1,000 all-purpose yards last season as a freshman. And they added multiple weapons at wide receiver from the portal. They add Noah Rogers, who was highly recruited out of high school, and they add Wesley Grimes from Wake Forest as well. And also don't sleep on the addition of Justin Jolie at tight end. He led UConn in receiving yards last season as a tight end. And they also add 800-yard rusher from Duke, Jordan Waters. They've been consistently good under Dave Doeren, and I expect big things from the offense, and the defense has been consistently good over the last couple of years. And I think an ACC championship appearance is possible for NC State in 2024. Number 23 is USC. And my question for USC is, can the defense show any signs of improvement with the new defensive coach and staff? Lincoln Riley has taken a new approach heading into the Big Ten. He knows that this team has a lot of rebuilding to do, and he brought in some elite caliber defensive coaches. And I probably believe in this USC team a bit more than other people do, but Lincoln Riley coached football teams won 10 plus games every year until 2023, and I trust this offense. I expect USC to turn it around. Maybe they don't win a Big Ten title anytime soon, I'm not saying that will happen, but I think in the near future they will be in the conversation to win the conference. But the big questions come defensively with this team. At number 22 is Kansas. And my question for Kansas is, can quarterback Jalen Daniels stay healthy? And I know they have questions in the front seven defensively, but the biggest question for me starts with a guy like Jalen Daniels. Because if Jalen Daniels cannot stay healthy, I don't see this team making a run for the Big 12 title in 2024. But if Jalen Daniels stays healthy, this team has a realistic shot. The offense has great upside, and Jalen Daniels is one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12, so do not sleep on this Kansas team. Number 21 is Arizona. And my question for Arizona is, do they have the right depth on the defensive line? I really do like this Arizona team, and I do think they are being slept on for 2024. But they did lose multiple defensive linemen to the portal, which is a concern. I like the addition of Trey Smith on the edge. He was a huge addition. And they added a FCS defensive tackle. And that guy is Chubba Mai, who was a 347-pounder at defensive tackle. The secondary should be strong, but the defensive line is still a question mark. At number 20 is Texas A&M. And my question for them is, will Texas A&M be a winner with Mike Elko right away? Texas A&M has one of the most talented rosters in the SEC, and I don't have a big question at any specific position group. Don't get me wrong, they don't have a perfect roster. They don't have nearly a caliber of roster like Georgia or Alabama in the SEC. But they do have a really good roster. And I think the more important question is, can Mike Elko coach this team to fulfill their expectation in 2024? Because I think he was a great hire for this A&M team, and I think he might be what A&M needed. This might be a Texas A&M roster that can win 8, 9, or maybe even 10 games if Mike Elko is the right guy for the head coaching job. An easy schedule and a big hire at head coach gives this team potential for 2024. Number 19 is Miami. And my question for Miami is, how does the secondary match up against the great receiving corps in the ACC? Miami has one of the most talented rosters in the ACC and arguably in the country with the talent that they've been bringing in through recruiting and the portal. The offense is complete with Cam Ward at quarterback, Damian Martinez at running back, a great group of wide receivers, and a good offensive line. The defense has some important pieces back in the front seven as well. Ruben Bain Jr. is back, and they add Tyler Barron, who was a huge addition on the edge. They do have questions in the secondary, though. They have a revamped secondary, and last season they gave up 227 passing yards a game, which was near the bottom of the ACC. I don't see a lot of weaknesses with this roster other than the secondary. And they've had some solid transfers, so we'll see how they shape up there. At number 18 is Kansas State. And my question for Kansas State is, do they have the linebacker depth to round out a great defense? I really don't see many weaknesses on this defense, but last season injuries actually forced this group to play more players than expected at linebacker. They do have all Big 12 second team linebacker Austin Moore back as well as Desmond Purnell. But outside of those two guys, I have my questions with the depth in this linebacker room. And they will have to match up with really good offensive lines and rushing attacks like Utah and Oklahoma State. So that's why I'm pointing a finger at the linebacker room, because there might be a lack of depth there. Now, number 17 is Oklahoma State, and my question for them is, can they be more consistent? Oklahoma State has questions on defense and at quarterback, but I think the biggest question is how consistent can they actually be, because they were not consistent at all in 2023, and they play some good teams on their 2024 schedule, so it's not going to be an easy walk to the Big 12 championship game. They play Utah and Kansas State back-to-back, and that could ultimately help determine if they get in the Big 12 title game. And then they have multiple road tests at BYU, Baylor, TCU, and Colorado in the second half of the season. Now let's not forget how they lost to UCF on the road 45-3 last season, and they also lost to Iowa State on the road. They were a super inconsistent team, and I do think that is a big question heading into 2024, but they have 20 starters back and they should be one of the top teams in the Big 12. At number 16 is Oklahoma, and my question for them is, how will the offensive line match up against the SEC defensive fronts? Oklahoma has 5 new starting offensive linemen for 2024. They have a brutal 2024 schedule, and they play against some very good line of scrimmage teams next season. And maybe some Oklahoma fans do not want to hear this, but if Oklahoma wins 8 games in 2024, I think Oklahoma fans should be happy with that result. Because it is going to be very hard having to face one of the toughest schedules in college football with 5 new starting offensive linemen and having a new starter at quarterback as well. I don't have high expectations for Oklahoma in 2024, but I do believe in Brent Venables, and it would not surprise me if they were competing for SEC titles in the near future. But I just don't see that happening in 2024. Number 15 is Tennessee, and my question for them is, does the secondary take the right step forward? The defense for Tennessee is on the rise, and they have one of the top defensive fronts in the SEC. And I also think the offense will be in good hands with the young Nico Iamaleava at quarterback. But last season, Tennessee gave up 234 passing yards a game, which was in the bottom 5 of the SEC. They only returned 3 starters defensively. They add 4-star cornerback Jamar McCoy and 3-star safety Jacoby Thomas from the portal. They have a bunch of unproven guys in the secondary and a bunch of new starters. So I don't have high expectations for the secondary next season, to be honest. But just for some of you guys' information, I do have Tennessee making the playoffs next season. At number 14 is Clemson. Now my question for Clemson is, can the offense overexceed my expectation for them? They have big questions at center and at wide receiver and at the quarterback position. I have big questions for this offense as a whole. They don't use the portal to bring in playmakers, and they do have some talented receivers, but they are all young and unproven. And I really don't have faith in Cade Klubnik as a quarterback. I don't think he'll be a difference maker at quarterback. And the offensive line has big questions, definitely at center. I expect the defense to be one of the best in the ACC, and that's almost a given, but the offense needs to take a big step forward if they want a shot at winning the ACC. But I just don't have great expectations for that offense. Number 13 is LSU, and my question for LSU is, does the defense take the right step forward with the new defensive coordinator Blake Baker? The hire of Blake Baker was a big hire defensively, and maybe that helps point the trajectory of this LSU defense in the right direction. But I think it's going to take more than just 1 year to rebuild this defense. They have one of the lowest ranked transfer portal groups in the SEC, and they didn't bring any big players in defensively. The offense should take a step down, and let's be real, anything less than a Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback is a step down at that quarterback position. Harold Perkins is one of the most talented defensive players in the country, don't get me wrong, and I expect the new defensive coordinator Blake Baker to make the best out of a guy like Harold Perkins. But Harold Perkins doesn't have the defense around him. So my question for this team is, will they take a step forward at all defensively? I don't expect the defense to take a huge step forward, but they have time to turn it around with defensive coordinator Blake Baker. So we'll see what happens, but I just don't think it happens in 1 year. Number 12 is Utah. And my question for them is, can Cam Rising be the ultimate difference maker for that offense in 2024? Look, I don't want to devalue how big it is for Utah to have a guy like Cam Rising back at quarterback. But my personal opinion is that Utah is a bit too high in the AP poll, and Cam Rising is going to have to put up great numbers if they want to win the Big 12. I understand Cam Rising led Utah to back-to-back Pac-12 championship games in 2021 and 2022, and Kyle Whittingham is one of the best coaches in college football. But how can we trust that Utah is going to take this big step forward offensively when we have not even seen Cam Rising play since 2022? And they also don't have a star-studded receiving corps. And people don't mention this a lot, but the secondary is also a question because they only returned 2 starters and they gave up 237 passing yards per game last season, which was ranked 79th in the nation. I know their team got completely destroyed with injuries last season, and the defense should improve in the secondary, I do believe that. And I know I can trust Kyle Whittingham, and because of that, I do have them making the Big 12 championship game. But I don't understand Utah being this highly ranked to open the season. Some people have Utah in their top 10, and that really confuses me as well. But the ultimate difference maker for this team will have to be Cam Rising if they want to win the Big 12 and make a run for the college football playoff. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I have my questions with Cam Rising coming back after being gone for so long. Number 11 is Missouri. And my question for Missouri is how will the defense look without the defensive coordinator Blake Baker? I think Missouri's offense is being slept on heading into next season, but defensively they have big questions after losing 6 starters and their defensive coordinator. I don't think the defense will be bad. I'm interested to see how that defense looks with a bunch of new transfers and the new defensive coordinator Corey Batoon. I love what they did in the portal, bringing in 4 stars like Turiano Pride and also 4-star Darius Smith on the edge. They have some guys on that defense, and if the defense is good enough, this could be a team that can make a run for the SEC championship game because I do have great expectations for that offense. Number 10 is Florida State. And my question for Florida State is do they have the offensive playmakers to win the ACC again? I think the defense is in good hands and they will be a top 15, possibly top 10 defense with some of the big playmakers they actually have defensively. But we will have to see new playmakers emerge offensively after losing guys like Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, and Jaheim Bell. I think they have a great running back room with Tola coming back, and they also added the huge addition of Roydell Williams at running back. They have Kyle Morlock back at tight end and Jakeed Douglas back at wide receiver. Those 2 guys were solid pieces to that offense last season, but they will need to take a step forward, and I think the transfer Malik Benson needs to be the difference maker at wide receiver. They don't have any huge standout wide receivers outside of maybe Malik Benson, who still has a lot to prove, and people have questions with DJU at quarterback as well. But I do believe Mike Novell will figure it out offensively, and I'm interested to see which guys can emerge at the wide receiver position for Florida State. Number 9 is Michigan, and the obvious question for them is how will the passing game look? Michigan lost 10 starters offensively from last season, and the biggest question for this Michigan team has to be at the quarterback position. I'm expecting Alex Orji to be that guy at quarterback, and he should be a solid dual threat option for Michigan, but he's very unproven as a passer, and we really haven't seen much from that passing game. I have high expectations for the run game with Edwards and Mullings in that backfield, and the defense should be elite again. But a few wide receivers need to emerge for this team, and Michigan needs to develop a good passing game if they want a shot at winning the Big Ten again. Number 8 is Penn State, and my question for Penn State is do they have the weapons at wide receiver to contend for a Big Ten championship? Similar to Michigan, Penn State really needs help at wide receiver. I'm just going to be honest with you, I don't have high expectations for that offense next season. They lost Keandre Lambert-Smith, who was the only wide receiver on that roster with 1,000 career receiving yards. They add 5-star Julian Fleming, who should be that number 1 guy, but I don't expect him to be anything crazy for Penn State. They added the offensive coordinator from Kansas, which was actually a big hire, but he has a lot of work to do offensively with this Penn State team. Luckily, he's got one of the best backfields in the country to work with, and people are still buying stock in Drew Aller. But I need to see it with this Penn State offense before I can believe it, because I don't have great expectations for that offense with absolutely no reliable targets at wide receiver. Number 7 is Notre Dame, and my question for Notre Dame is will the offense take the right step forward with Riley Leonard at quarterback and the offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock? Unlike Penn State, I think there's more optimism for this Notre Dame offense to take a step forward. I believe Riley Leonard will be an upgrade at quarterback, and they add Mike Denbrock from LSU, who was the offensive coordinator for the number 1 offense in college football last season. Running back Jeremiah Love is going to have a big 2024 season in my opinion, and they add multiple wide receivers from the portal, and that includes a 1,000-yard receiver from the group of 5, Chris Mitchell. I don't expect this offense to be elite or even great, but I think it will be closer to good in 2024 with a rising star at running back, a better quarterback, more options at wide receiver, and the addition of Mike Denbrock was also huge. Number 6 is Ole Miss. And my question for Ole Miss is how will all of the new transfers fit in defensively? Ole Miss brought in the number 1 total class in the country, bringing in guys like 5-star defensive tackle Walter Nolan and one of the top edge rushers in the country, Princely Yu. They have a bunch of new faces on that defense, and a lot of people expect a big step forward from this defense. So I am interested to see how those new transfers can actually help this team out defensively. Number 5 is Alabama. And maybe this isn't a complex question, but my question for them is how will Alabama football look with Kalen DeBoer? I don't have questions with how Alabama will look in terms of their record. I think they're going to be really good with Kalen DeBoer. And I still think Alabama will be an elite team that contends for the SEC every year. And the standard is going to be set high for a guy like Kalen DeBoer. But personally, I'm just interested to see how different Alabama will look without Nick Saban, but instead with an incredible offensive mind like Kalen DeBoer, who has won games everywhere he has coached. Number 4 is Texas, and my question for them is how will Texas look defensively? This is also a pretty simple question, but I couldn't figure out which part of the defense I had a bigger question for, the defensive line or the secondary. They are both intriguing position groups for Texas heading into next season. And I say that because Texas had one of the best rush defenses last season, but they lose their 2 big-time defensive tackles to the NFL. And I do think they are going to take a step back at defensive tackle. But they also added a huge addition on the edge by adding 4-star Trey Moore, who should be one of the biggest disruptors in the country defensively. And I actually think the secondary is pointing in the right direction, even after having a pretty bad pass defense last season. So there's a bunch of unknowns with this defense, but they have young guys like Malik Muhammad and Derek Williams who have big potential for that secondary. And they should both take a step forward in 2024 as sophomores. And they also have a bunch of talented freshmen in the secondary as well. And they added a big 4-star addition of Andrew Mukaba at safety. The defense is actually very talented, more than people realize, but the defense is also unproven, and the defense is intriguing to me. So the defense is an unknown, but the offense is going to be one of the best in the country. Number 3 is Oregon, and my question for them is do they have the defensive depth to compete at the highest level in college football? I'm going to be honest, as an Oregon fan, there are questions with the depth defensively, definitely at safety. I'm expecting young freshmen like Aaron Flowers and Peyton Woodyard to play early at safety. Kobe Savage should be one of the top safeties in the Big Ten, and Tysheem Johnson is a veteran at safety. Those 2 guys should definitely start at safety. But they are both pretty small. They are both sub 6 feet in height, and behind them they don't have any proven backups at safety. I think the defense will be one of the best in the country when you look at the 11 guys they have starting defensively. They have 9 projected senior defensive starters for 2024, and they have some elite playmakers on that defense. But the second and third string players are mostly unproven freshmen and sophomore players. I'm not saying guys won't step up, because there's always going to be players who step up, but it's just something to keep an eye on. But regardless, the offense is elite enough where it can make up for the questions of their depth defensively. And don't sleep on that Oregon defense because they are actually very good at the first level of starters. Number 2 is Ohio State, and my question for them is Will Howard good enough at the quarterback position for Ohio State? This one is pretty obvious, but Will Howard is an X factor for this Ohio State roster. Can he be good enough for the Buckeyes to ultimately win the Big Ten and the national championship? Because Kyle McCord was not that guy. I don't even think Will Howard has to be great. I'm thinking he has to be closer to what J.J. McCarthy or Stetson Bennett was. And in that case, this would be a national championship team. But Will Howard is a veteran, and he's also effective with his legs, something Kyle McCord wasn't. I don't think Ohio State needs elite quarterback play from Will Howard. The defense should be the best in the country, and I also think they have the best backfield in the country. As long as the offensive line isn't as bad as it was last season, then Ohio State will have a shot to win it all. But Will Howard needs to be a game manager for this Ohio State team. And number 1 is Georgia. And my question for Georgia is defensive depth an issue for Georgia? I think Georgia is kind of in the same boat as Oregon when I look at the defense. They have elite veteran playmakers defensively, but they have a bunch of freshmen and sophomores at the backup positions. Every team in college football has questions heading into 2024, and it makes this upcoming season very interesting. But no other team besides maybe Alabama and Ohio State have recruited talent like Georgia has. So I expect guys to step up defensively for them. But Kirby Smart actually admitted that they have questions with the defensive line depth heading into this season, and that could be an obstacle they face with a gauntlet SEC schedule. So I'm interested to see how that Georgia defensive line comes along in 2024. But anyways, that is going to do it for today's video. Let me remind you guys to like the video and also subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And if you guys love college football, then you will love this channel because we upload a ton of college football content and we basically cover everything on this channel. So definitely consider subscribing and also consider checking out my socials down in the description below. But that is going to do it, guys, and peace out.